Okay, hello and welcome back to another Blizzcon video. This time, we're going to be covering some Starcraft 2 units. Now wait. Even if you don't play Starcraft, this could be a fun video. Starcraft is a game that I'm really passionate about, despite the fact that I haven't had a lot of time to play it in the last year or two. But yeah, I'm really hyped for Legacy of the Void, and some of these multiplayer changes and new units, pretty cool. I'd say half of them won't make it past beta, but hey, it's worthy talking about them. So I'm going to start off with the very first race that I played, but it's not the current race that I play, the Terran. So the Terran have got two new units and a bunch of changes to some of the old units. First of all, we've got the Cyclone. This will lock onto targets and then do high single target damage. They can also shoot while moving, which is quite powerful actually. Now they move at roughly the speed, well actually no, at the speed of a Stalker, and they are great against things like large slow targets like say an Ultralisk, and they look to be quite powerful in the early game. You can counter these by engaging really quickly and then trying to slow their movement and do various things like that. Looks like a fun ability, looks like there could be some fun micro both with and against it, so I'm certainly interested to see how this actually pans out. Can't wait to get into that beta, hopefully. Okay, so next we've got the Hercules. This is a short-range unit that basically grapples itself right into combat. It can one-shot banelings, which is pretty exciting, and also does a small amount of splash damage. Essentially, it's great against Zergling Baneling, and it's pretty interesting having a direct counter to that. So yeah, pretty cool. Now, the Hercs are actually pretty good against Protoss as well, as they've got lots of health and light armor, so they can grapple in, real quick and disrupt a death ball. And though they are kind of weak to Zealots, which is a bit of a problem, though their light armor means that they're great against things like Immortals and stuff like that. So it looks like a really cool unit. I love the idea of grappling into battle. And they cannot attack air targets, which I suppose is, well, I don't know, it makes sense because they're kind of a short-range unit anyway. Now next we've got some changes to pre-existing units. The siege tanks are a little bit different now in that they can actually be lifted and placed down by medevacs while they're in siege mode. This opens up loads of opportunities for new kinds of harassment and micromanagement. It looks really awesome, though I can imagine it being hyper frustrating for new players, and maybe the APM requirements of some of these things will be a bit strange at the low end. So yeah, we'll have to see how it goes. So next we've got Thors. Thors have got a new ability which allows them to self-repair. Now don't worry, it's not too insane. They actually shut down and they can't move while they're self-repairing. Now, I think this means that if you're in some sort of big death ball scenario where you're getting wiped out, well, you'll still get wiped out, but if you're in a small engagement with only a few Thors and a few enemies, then chances are you'll be able to micromanage your the self-heal on the Thors to ensure that maybe they last a bit longer or something like that, or perhaps even just last until you can get some reinforcements over there. It looks like a fun ability that will open up some very exciting and interesting macro or micro even opportunities, so yeah, pretty cool. Now, speaking of micro opportunities, we've got the changes for the Banshees. These are pretty interesting. They've got increased range, and they can now come with Cloak by default, which is a bit weird to me, honestly. Very strong in the early game, I'd imagine. And finally, they have got a new upgrade, which will increase their speed. Overall, this means more Banshee micro, Banshees being a bit stronger overall, I'd say. And though I'm just a bit concerned about them getting Cloak. I could see Banshee Rush as being a more potent thing, but I'm sure there will be metagame solutions which will fix that problem. Now next we've got Battle Cruisers. This is kind of insane. Battle Cruisers have got an ability which is extremely expensive in terms of energy, which allows them to warp anywhere. According to one of their videos, it sounded like it was anywhere including places without vision, so we'll have to see some final confirmation of that. Strange, but anyway, this does look like it's going to be massive for supporting your army from afar, and then maybe also some more creative harassment options. Maybe you're doing a marine drop. Well, that's fine. You just drop in some battle cruisers if you really want to press an advantage. Hey, Total Biscuits, battle cruiser rush. Maybe that'll be stronger now. Who the hell knows? Okay, so with Terran covered, I'm going to move on to the Protoss. I'll give you my full thoughts on kind of everything in general at the end of the video. Now, Protoss have got one new unit. It's the Disruptor. This thing's bloody insane. So these are basically a Baneling mine, sort of. It's like both of them sort of, transformed together into some sort of crazy thing. This is a regular unit. It can just, walk around the place, but its special thing is it transforms into an immortal mode, and after a few seconds it will then proceed to explode and return to its normal mode where it can be damaged. So micro is going to be very important when dealing with these. You'll need to split up your units and do things like that. Honestly, I think this looks extremely powerful, maybe to the point of being too powerful. Certainly, I think it'll be interesting in combination with other units. Maybe you could sort of trap down your enemy with zealots or do something like that, then bring these guys in, or who knows, maybe you could perhaps do a big force field wall and then move in the disruptors. I think there could be some super OP combinations here, and I don't know how this unit's going to pan out as we move through the, not even the expansion, just the beta. I don't know if this unit will make it through beta. So next, Immortals have been changed significantly. Now they've got, a very controversial change, I'd imagine, in that Hardened Shield is now not a thing anymore. Now Hardened Shield would reduce damage that they would take from a single large source, like say a cannon or like a shot from a siege tank or something like that. Now that was the big niche of this unit, but it's been replaced with something which is an active ability which absorbs damage. So this is a more micro-intensive change that will make it so that Immortals will be better against things like, say, Hydras than they previously were, while still being good against tanks, but perhaps not as good against tanks. I don't like this change. Honestly, it feels like the Immortal is being homogenized down and it's losing a bit of its niche. I like the idea of an Immortal being screwed when it was just swarmed by Balings, yet still being extremely strong against a whole bunch of tanks. I thought that was cool, but I just don't agree with this change. I don't like it. Sorry, Blizz. Now next we've got some changes to the, a change to the Warp Prism. It can now pick up units from a distance. So this basically just means more drop micro, which I think is a pretty cool thing. Next we've got the Tempest. This has been redesigned. They now attack ground targets and can move faster than they previously did. They've also got a new long-range ability which works on both ground and air targets called Disintegration. This does 500 damage over 50 seconds. Though in my opinion this is super OP in terms of harassment. You could just poke into where your enemy's big army is, do this ability in a few of their super strong units and fly away again and kind of get free kills and super powerful units. So I'm very curious to see how they manage to balance this one. Also, the carrier has received some changes. You can now release interceptors to attack specific areas and things like that, and also interceptors will keep fighting as the carrier dies. The carrier is also a bit faster, and it has got a 90-second build time. Now, we've also got a change, two changes actually, to the Oracle. Revelation and its other stealth or vision-related ability have been just moved in. So Revelation is now both revealing and detecting. There's also a new ability that places a stasis mine. Now this stasis mine will be stealth to your enemy, and what happens if they walk over it is that anything hit by it will be put in stasis for a certain amount of time. Now the stasis means that they are invulnerable, but they can't move and can't attack. So essentially you're freezing them in time while you kill the rest of their army, and then when these guys unfreeze in time, you can just kill them pretty easily. Seems like a decently cool ability. And finally, they've switched up warping a little bit. It actually will take 8 seconds to warp in, and warping units will take 200% damage, which is kind of insane, actually. So, yeah, interesting stuff. Now, finally, I'm going to cover the Zerg, and the first bit of Zerg news is really good. The Lurker's back, and it's just like it was in Brood War. Fires out its little spines from when it's burrowed, which I think that's great. And they're, still allowing all of the same micromanagement of your Marines and stuff like that there was back in Brood War, which I'm really happy to see. This is an exciting, fun unit, and I'm just so glad it's back. Next, we've got the Ravager. Now, the Ravager is a newish unit that will basically mutate out of the Roach, and it's got an AoE ability which will target an area and do high damage. It will also destroy force fields, which is pretty big. Now, this will be really interesting in Zerg versus Protoss, because Zergs traditionally didn't have much of an answer to force fields. It was just like, oh yeah, the Protoss was good at their force fields, now I'm screwed. Well, now you've got something to kind of counter micro against force fields, which I think is really nice to see. And of course, there are some units which break force fields, but again, you might not always have them, and I like the idea of the Ravager quite a bit. Next are changes to the Nydus Worm, a very potentially fun unit that doesn't get used as much because it dies so quickly. Well, the Nydus is now invisible when burrowing and invincible while emerging, and this includes against detectors and things like that. So basically this will allow for super aggressive Nydus usage, which I think is great, and it should just open up some more sort of dynamic, reactive, counter-based gameplay from the Zergs, which is great because they're already very good at reacting to their opponent with, remaxing and stuff. So I think it could be really fun with, Nydus attacks and stuff like that. Awesome stuff, glad to hear it. They've also redesigned these swarm hosts, so essentially it doesn't need to burrow in order to launch locusts anymore. And the locusts themselves are stronger. They will eventually be able to fly with an upgrade at the late game, however they spawn far less frequently. So this is a pretty big change. The longer spawn time basically means that Mass Swarm Host is no longer viable. And I think this is great, as Mass Swarm Host was just it was the creation of so many boring not Heroes of the Storm, I keep on saying it, Heart of the Swarm matches, and I think it was very bad overall for the esports scene. It was dull. So it's great that they're fixing this up, and it looks like this is going to be more of a kind of harassment and support unit rather than the kind of core basis of your army. I think that's so good for the gameplay. Next, they fixed up Corruptors. So Corruptors now have a new ability called Caustic Energy. This is like a channeled thing, a bit like a Void Ray, that will deal damage to any target, which is pretty damn awesome, I think. You see, one of the things with Corruptors is that they always, they can end up being useless very quickly, and then as a Zerg you just sack them because you needed to, remax with something a bit more useful. So they've essentially made it so that Corruptors will be a bit more useful in general, and I think that's really good. Now, they're not going to be amazing. They are still mainly for, anti-air, but if you're in that situation, then they will be useful for attacking things. Specifically, stuff like buildings, it's a bit more, immobile, where they can just kind of, fly over and boom. So, yeah, very nice ability. Then finally, we have got the Infestor. Now, the Infestor has got a new ability called Aggressive Mutation, which will just grant a flat DPS buff to any friendly units, and it's a little AoE that you just click on, and boom, away it goes. So yeah, that is it for this video. That's all the currently talked about StarCraft 2 unit changes. Overall, I think that it's definitely an increase for micromanagement. And I'd say that certainly this is a bit strange on the low level of the game for the less skilled players. I think it's going to make things a bit weird. A lot of people will be very much inclined to spend a lot of time doing their APM, and they'll probably forget that the most important thing is the economy. It's the one thing, if you're a new StarCraft player, don't necessarily worry as much about your marine splits and your stutter stepping and all that stuff. Don't worry about doing that perfectly. Worry about getting a good economy. And I feel like this might take away from that somewhat as people get overwhelmed by a lot of these new micro-intensive units. However, from a pro perspective, for just watching competitive games, I think this opens up so many awesome opportunities for really cool things to happen. So I'm really glad that they're doing that. I think that overall it will balance, and a bit more micro is certainly a good thing that could just, end up with there being more fun. They've also released the Archon mode, in which two people can control the same army, so, army and economy, so that's pretty cool. And if you have one player just focusing on the army and focusing on the microing of the units, then that could really just lead to some really fun, high-level-ish games, but, not with high-level players, so that could be really cool as well. So overall, I think that this is pretty interesting. I'm glad Swarm hosts are kind of changing away from what they were in Heart of the Swarm. And yeah, looks like interesting stuff, though of course a lot of it does sound a bit broken at this stage. Numbers aren't final, and it has to go through the beta. Remember how little of the Heroes of the Swarm stuff got through beta? Well, I'd say a similar thing will happen here. So we'll have to see how it pans out, but that's their current plans. Anyway, that's it for the video. Let me know what you think about these units if you play StarCraft. Let me know if you're planning on picking up Legacy of the Void as your first StarCraft game, given that it's now a, standalone thing. And yeah, that's it for the video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.